Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing our guests. We first have Setrag Balian, who is an activist, writer, and fourth-generation descendant of the esteemed Balian family. He has studied economics in France and Armenia and explored the world of ceramics in Spain. Setrag's roots run deep in the cultural heritage of his ancestors, as the renowned Balians are one of the founding families of the Armenian ceramics in Jerusalem. With passion about preserving the cultural legacy of the Armenian community in Jerusalem, Setrag is not only an activist, but a co-founder of the Save the Ark movement, dedicated to defending and safeguarding the Armenian quarter in Jerusalem, a cause close to his heart. Setrag has also emerged as a prominent voice in advocating for the preservation of the architectural, historical, and cultural treasures of the cherished Armenian quarter. Beyond his activism, Setrag has also contributed to scholarly discourse on Jerusalem Armenians through several articles. His insights offer valuable perspectives on the challenges and triumphs of the vibrant community, shedding light on their unique cultural identity and historical significance, particularly in the old city of Jerusalem. Hagop, the Djernazian, embodies resilience and determination as a fourth-generation descendant of the post-genocide Jerusalem Armenian community. His passionate advocacy for the preservation of the Armenian quarter has led him to take on the role as a co-founder of the Save the Ark movement. Through leadership and dedication, he has played a pivotal role in raising awareness about the importance of safeguarding the historic and culturally significant Armenian land. Hagop also serves as an integral role of the executive committee member and leader of the Scouts at the Hoyechman Club in Jerusalem, a cornerstone institution in the Jerusalem Armenian community. We're very lucky to have Hagop and Setrag back for an All-ASA panel. They were hosted by us last year also. And also currently, Hagop is pursuing a bachelor's degree in international relations and Middle Eastern studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Next, from USC, we have Dr. Hrag Papazian, who is USC's Tashjian early career in contemporary Armenian studies and assistant professor of anthropology. Dr. Papazian received his Doctor of Philosophy in Anthropology and Master of Philosophy in Social Anthropology from the University of Oxford and his Bachelor's in Communication Arts from the Lebanese American University. Dr. Papazian's scholarship focuses on the diverse landscape of Armenianness in contemporary Turkey, studying Christian Armenian and Muslim Armenian citizens of Turkey and labor migrants from the Republic of Armenia. And last but not least, we have Yeghia Tashjian, who is the Islam Affairs Institute Public Policy and International Affairs American University of Beirut's Regional and International Affairs Cluster Coordinator. He holds a master's in public policy and international affairs from the American University of Beirut. He entered his bachelor's in political science from the Hagop University in 2013, and his master's thesis focused on China's geopolitical and energy security interests in Iran and the Persian Gulf. Currently, he is engaged in research on the phenomenon of Turkish-Russian co-opetition in the MENA and Caucasus region, and Russia's involvement in the international North-South transport corridor. He contributes to various local and regional newspapers, has presented various topics on regional security issues, and is a part-time instructor at the American University of Beirut. So thank you again for joining us today. Just to lay out the outline of today's program, I'll be asking a few questions to each speaker based on the region that they will be speaking on today, and then later asking a few questions to the entire panel. And if we have some time, we'll open up to some audience Q&A. As some sort of introductory question, I'd like to go through each of you and hear an overview of the Armenian community in your region. So how was the community established? What are some key events that have shaped its development, and how has it evolved to its present state? We can start with Dr. Papazian, who's going to be speaking on Turkey today.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sofia, for this introduction, and thanks everyone for having me here. Thank you to the All-ASA, and thanks everyone for being here. So I'll try to be as short as possible. If I go beyond the limits that you expect, just let me know.
Sounds good.
I'll wrap it up. So if we're taking the question on how the Armenian community of contemporary Turkey or Istanbul was established, we have to go back in history. For ages, centuries ago, there has been a community in Istanbul, not to speak, of course, of the Armenian ancestral homeland, parts of which now are in what is modern-day Turkey. So but I'll skip all that because the focus is on the contemporary, and I'll focus and I'll discuss briefly the history of the Armenian community in the Republic of Turkey, that is post-genocide Turkey and post-1923. So the Republic of Turkey was established in 1923 on what remained from the Ottoman Empire. And what's key here is to understand that we are not speaking, unlike some of the other communities, or most other, or all other communities, perhaps in the global Armenian diaspora, we're not speaking here about a community that arrived there in more recent times. And so these are the contemporary community of Armenian community in Istanbul has some of its members surviving from the old Istanbul Armenian Bosahai Armenian community, which are famous for having contributed to the architectural landscape of Constantinople, but also more generally, the Amira families. I don't know if the Balians of Jerusalem are connected to the Balians, to the Bolis Balians. We might hear about that later. But so only a minority of the contemporary community of Istanbul Armenians, or Armenians in Istanbul today, are descendants of the old Constantinople Armenians. The rest, the majority, have come to fill in the place of those out-migrating from Istanbul, from what turned from Constantinople to Istanbul, migrating outside, so to places to like the US, to Canada, Europe. So the number of old Istanbul Armenians, old Constantinople, old Bosahaya Armenians has decreased after the genocide and after the establishment of the Republic of Turkey. Yet, what happened is that we had this continuous flow of Armenians surviving in the heartlands, in the historical Armenian settlements, like places like Sasun, Diyarbakir, Dikranagert, and all other places that you know and you've heard about. People, Armenians, very, very small communities that survived the genocide and that stayed in those areas, have been continuously coming to, so it's a process of internal migration, have been continuously coming to Istanbul all the way until the 1990s. So in my research, I've met people who were born in Sasun, born in villages around Sasun, who are representative of the very last remnants families of Christian Armenians surviving after the genocide, but who then eventually, with their families, have made their way to Istanbul. So that's one thing to emphasize to start with, that we're speaking here about, when we speak about Istanbul Armenians, Bosahais, we should have this idea, we should recognize that they are mostly representatives of those who survived the genocide and who remained in the ancestral Armenian homelands, settlements, villages, towns, etc. Yet this is also important because it helps me also come to how the Armenian community in post-genocide Turkey survived, and that was a story of, and is still a story of that was a story of very harsh conditions in which Armenianness. In which to keep one's Armenianness was definitely a challenge, and even more so if you're speaking about places outside Istanbul. So Istanbul, they kept Istanbul the only place where Armenian community organizations, churches, schools, orphanages, and the like could survive and could operate. Although the Treaty of Lausanne that established the Republic of Turkey promised freedoms of religion, religious expression, and minority to the three non-Muslim minorities, including the Armenians, this was limited only to Istanbul. Illegally. I mean, this was not how the Treaty of Lausanne set the stage. But they did everything to not enable Armenian schools to reopen and operate in places like, again, Kayseri, Malatya, Sepastia, places where there were enough people to sustain a community, to sustain a school. And so these people kept under pressure. They had to migrate to Istanbul because there was no communities, there was no means to survive as Armenians there in terms of keeping your language, sustaining your language, even your religion, keeping a church running, keeping a school running, but also because there were always pressures on a daily basis in terms of discrimination, harassment, violence. So I'll come to Istanbul. This is to set the stage of how things were. And then what we have today is above 95% of Armenians surviving in Turkey are now in Istanbul. We still have small pockets here and there, most noticeably in Hatay, the village of Vakıf, in Musaler, the one out of the seven that survived as Armenian after what happened in the 1930s with the transfer of that region from Syria, the French mandate, and then to Turkey. So we have the majority there. Now we speak about 40,000 Armenians. There, some people give larger numbers, but most recent number that I've heard of is from the patriarch Sahak Mashalian, Archbishop Sahak Mashalian, who mentioned that there are around 40,000 numbers in terms of numbers. And I'll touch briefly upon a few historical events that might give you a general picture of how things have been for Armenians in Turkey post-genocide, right? When we all know about the genocide, but these people survived in Turkey. They became citizens of the Republic of Turkey, yet that did not end, that was not the end of the story. So we had in the 1920s, 30s, laws outright discriminating them, for Armenians and other non-Muslims, like things about freedom of movement, freedom of occupation, professions. They could not access governmental positions, things like that. There was considerable pressure on languages, all languages apart from Turkish, with this huge campaign of Vatandaş Türkçe konuş in Turkish, which means citizens speak Turkish, and Armenians, like other non-Turkish speakers, were harassed in public for speaking their mother tongues. This led to moving the Armenian language and generally Armenian identity from the public space to the private space, to the space of the home, the schools, and the churches. Then in the 1940s, two major incidents happened that suggest what the approach of the Turkish state has been towards its citizens who are of Armenian origin and Christian Armenians. I'll touch upon the Muslim or Islamized Armenians later if there's interest, because that's also part of my research. But I'm focusing on the established community now. In 1941, there was a property tax supposedly applied upon all citizens, but it was very openly and it's not very openly in a discriminatory fashion, where the non-Muslims had exponentially so the non-Muslims had an exponentially higher tax rate that they had to pay, Armenians being at the top. So they had to pay above 200% of the amount of the property assets that they had, which led to some Turkish historians have coined this as an economic genocide, the purpose of which was to take away all the financial and economic assets that still remain in the hands of the non-Muslim communities and transfer it to the Turkish bourgeoisie, or create a Turkish bourgeoisie. 1 year later, in 1942, there was the incident of the 20 battalions, which were battalions that were, this is in the context of the Second World War, in which Turkey did not participate, but there was always this tension that it might possibly spill over, and then Turkey might want to join. These were 20 battalions that were only comprised of the non-Muslim communities. Again, they were essentially labor battalions. They were taken to forced labor, to do forced labor, and Armenians, like the other non-Muslims, were stopped in the streets, checked their IDs, and taken straight away to these battalions, where they had to spend more than a year, some of them in very dire conditions. I'll skip 15 years later. In 1955, there was this pogrom against the non-Muslim communities in Istanbul, also other major towns like Izmir and other places. It was a pogrom began on the night of 6th September. It ended in 7th September. Pillage, looting of all shops and businesses of Armenian, Greek, and Jewish citizens of Turkey, including hundreds of cases of rape against members of these communities. All of this, of course, unpunished and even orchestrated behind the scenes by state agents. In the 1980s, two Armenian religious representatives, priest and the pastor were arrested and tortured in prisons based on made-up charges. I'll come all the way to the turn of the century, 21st century, and 2007. I'm wrapping up. Hrant Dink was killed, the Turkish Armenian journalist, because he challenged the established narratives about the Armenian history, about the history of Armenians, including the genocide, but also about what Armenians generally and minorities have been going through. 4 years later, in 2011, Sevak Balakçı, an ethnically Armenian citizen of Turkey who was doing his military service, was killed on April 24 by a Turkish nationalist, comrade, who was also serving in the same regiment as he was. We can also speak about what happened during the 2020 Artsakh Nagorno-Karabakh war. That was perhaps the latest wave of anti-Armenian rising hate speech and pressure on the Armenian community. But I realize I might have been speaking for too long now. So this is a general history. I did this hoping that this will give a general sense of what things have been like since the establishment of the Republic. Sorry if I spoke too long.
Definitely, no, that was great. Thank you. We'll be returning to the question of the current politics of this region. So we'll be back there. Next, let's move on to Yeghia Tashjian, who is currently based in Lebanon. Can you tell us a bit about how Lebanon's Armenian community developed and where they stand today?
Thank you, Sofia. Thank you, everyone. I will be very brief. When to the Armenian community in Lebanon, I mean, mainly it was established, of course, after the genocide, but there were very small communities in Mount Lebanon, especially the Armenian Catholic community and so forth. So the main wave after Armenian immigration level happened in the early 1920s, and also we have a second wave, which was in 1930s, late 1930s, with the occupation or the annexation of Skandaron to modern Turkey. It's also remarkable, we always insist this, that the Armenians in Lebanon, they took citizenship the same year when all Lebanese, that is after the Lausanne Treaty. And starting late 1930s and 40s, there were participation of Armenians in Lebanon's elections. And this is very interesting because if you go back to history and read the Lebanese Arab newspapers, there were some reservations actually towards the participation of Armenians in the political process. And this happened, of course, thanks to the French colony, to be fair. But for example, because Lebanon is a very sectarian country, divided between the Muslims and the Christians, for example, the Christians, at least by reading the Christian newspapers, they welcomed the Armenian participation because also this increased the Christian percentage in Lebanon. But there were reservations by some Muslim, especially Sunni leaders, that arguing that Armenians don't know how to read Arabic, so how they are participating in the elections. However, it's very remarkable that starting in 1950s, we started seeing that there was the emergence of Armenian bourgeois in Lebanon, especially in Beirut. There was very well organized community, and also comparing to other communities, the Armenian community in Lebanon is highly politicized and highly institutionalized. Institutionalized by mainly the Armenian political parties, the cultural organizations, associations, the sports clubs, and the educational centers. Armenian University was founded, and it was highly politicized. At the same time, it used to absorb the regional dynamics that was going on in the Middle East, but also in the international arena. That is, for example, the Cold War between the Soviets and the Americans or the Western world. This competition was also reflected within the Armenian political parties. There were clashes sometimes in the 1950s. This is why I always said it was highly politicized. At the same time, the Armenian community was rising. I said economically, culturally, until the 1970s, when 1975, the Lebanese civil war started. despite the fact that the Armenians took a positive neutrality, and this is very important because it didn't mean that we were passive and we were detached from the reality on the ground, but we took a positive neutrality and we were a bridge between the Muslims and the Christians to some extent. However, of course, the 15 years of civil war impacted the life of the people. The Armenian community in Western Beirut, which was the bourgeois, let's say, to some extent, it was devastated. A lot of Armenians came to Mount Lebanon, to Burj Hamid and other areas, and the number shrank. So basically, a lot of Armenians, they left to Europe and US and Canada until the late 1980s or early 1990s, when the civil war ended. The Armenians gained parliamentary seats, however, their numbers shrinking. And quite remarkably that the Armenian community in Lebanon, it is the only community that its number is decreasing. Even the Assyrian community, there is an increase of percentage 0 point something, but the Armenian community is decreasing because, first of all, the economic challenges we are facing in Lebanon, the political instability. I mean, like starting 1990s, we have seen many wars, assassinations in the country, political instability, and of course, the recent, the Beirut port explosion of 2020, the financial crisis in Lebanon, which still we are suffering, and of course, the recent war. So a lot of young people are immigrating. Some of them are going to Armenia, and others going to Western countries. If I will make a quick reflection, I can say that we are facing, of course, some challenges, but at the same time, the institutions, at least the Armenian institutions, are surviving for now. By institutions, I mean the cultural centers, the educational centers, the schools, the political life. I mean, we have municipality elections in the coming month. There is mobilization by the political parties. Alliances are being formed. So as we say in Lebanon, life is continuing despite the challenges we are facing.
Thank you very much. We definitely will return to the question of the institutions that are currently being supported in Lebanon. But before we come back to you for Syria, we can move on to Jerusalem with Setrag and Hagop. I'd love to hear about the Armenian community where you're based.
Hi, thank you, first of all, Sofia, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having us into the All-ASA. So I'll jump right in. I'll go a bit back in history. So the Armenian community in Jerusalem is one of the oldest diasporas in the world. Obviously, I wouldn't consider the community in Turkey diaspora, since it was Armenian homeland, historical homeland, and so on. So factually, it is one of the oldest, if not the oldest diaspora. And I will start, although there's an Armenian presence preceding Christianity, the biggest influx will come obviously in after 301, when Armenia accepts Christianity as a state religion. The Armenian pilgrims and monks start arriving to Jerusalem quite early. So 4th century upwards already there's a presence. There's even a mosaic, for example, that was found in the Musrara, and recently 2-3 other mosaics that are 1600, 1500-year-old Armenian mosaics. One of them was a tomb for unknown Armenian soldiers that had fallen. It says that only God knows their name. So in the 7th century, in 638, we have the first patriarch, the first bishop of Jerusalem, Armenian bishop of Jerusalem. And well, it used to be bishop. The rank was later elevated to patriarch, but his name is Abraham. So the institution exists since 638, and it's actually the longest uninterrupted presence of a Christian institution in the Holy Land. The Greeks, for example, were expelled for about 100 years by Omar ibn al-Khattab, and Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi will also expel the Catholics, mainly the Latins, for about 600-700 years. So the patriarch, the Armenian patriarch of Jerusalem, is the only one that until today has always ruled from Jerusalem. The Greeks for a while were in Constantinople, the Romans, the Catholics were in Rome. So this is the longest uninterrupted presence we're talking about. We have recognition letters from the Prophet himself, the Armenian Museum, Prophet Muhammad. There was a delegation that went and met with him, Armenian delegation. There's a recognition letter, Ferman, which what's called Firmans in Islamic tradition, also from Omar ibn al-Khattab and also from Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. So Armenians throughout their presence here were very good and strong diplomats that could find, ways to maintain good relations with whoever the rulers or the occupiers of Jerusalem were. There's even a 12th, 13th century plaque at the entrance of the Armenian convent that is from a Mamluk king that says, God curse those who tax the Armenians or harm the Armenians in any way for 7 generations. So the Armenians were quite protected. So the golden age of the Armenians would be during the Crusader period. As we know, the kingdom of Cilicia played a pivotal role during the Crusades. And so we had, for example, 5 Armenian queens in Jerusalem that were married to the Frank leaders, the kingdom of Jerusalem. The most famous is Melisandre. We also have Arda, Morphia, and others. So again, the Armenian presence was cemented with the arrival of the Crusaders and the roles that the Armenian queens play. Melisandre, for example, after her husband passes away, she will rule over Jerusalem for decades, which is a very important point in history. And of course, during the Ottoman Empire as well, Armenians acquired a lot of properties, and they were able to enlarge the Armenian quarter as we know it today. I mean, I can go on, with the importance of the Armenian quarter and the Armenian presence. A few anecdotes, for example, when Napoleon arrived in Jaffa and his troops were fighting and got wounded, they were healed by Armenian monks. And as a gift, he gave a cloth from his tent to the Armenian church, which is used to this day by the priests inside the church. And another interesting story is the story of Gregory the chain bearer, who was a patriarch who came to power. He was named, back then they used to name patriarchs of Jerusalem and Constantinople. So he was named patriarch in the early 18th century when the Armenian patriarchate was facing crushing debts and threats. And he was able to, well, that's why he's called Shchtayagir, the chain bearer. He put chains, 2 kilo, I think, 2 kilo chains around his neck. And he vowed never to remove them until he repaid all the debts of the patriarchate. So he put those chains and went to the Armenian faithful all over the world, collected money, was able to repay all the debts, and got even more money, acquired more properties, finished and fortified the walls of the Armenian convent. So it's a very rich presence. And of course, one of the biggest important things that Armenians have is equal custodianship in the holy places. So, for example, the Holy Sepulchre and the Nativity Church, even in the Nativity Church, we have a larger area adjacent to the church, and we are equal to the Greeks and the Catholics, which says a lot. Again, the Greeks representatives here, they consider themselves representatives of the Orthodox Church as a whole, the Eastern. So it's a few 100 million people, and the Catholic Church is about 1.2, 1.3 billion followers and worshippers, and us Armenians, we have equal rights in the Holy Sepulchre and the Holy Nativity Church. This is just to get an idea of the importance of the Armenian presence. So in Jerusalem, as in the other, I think, Middle Eastern countries, we have what we call 2 kinds of Armenians. We have the old Armenians, so anyone that came pre-genocide. In the Arab countries, they're called Arman Adim, which is old Armenians. But for us, for example, they're called Kagakatis. Kagakatis means locals. And these are basically, some can trace their lineage back to the Crusader period, but also mainly came 16th, 17th century upwards. And then there are the Kahtagans, which are the refugees, the survivors and the descendants of the survivors who came after 1915, after the genocide, and they were mostly welcomed inside the Armenian convent. So the Kahtagans usually live inside the convent, the Karakatis around the convent, because in the 12th century, when St. James was built, the Armenians started gathering around the St. James Cathedral, which is what formed slowly the Armenian quarter. So the Armenian quarter today is one of 4 quarters in the Old City. You have the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and finally the Armenian quarter. Again, just by hearing this, you understand the importance of Armenians. And we're talking, this is the only quarter that is to a nation, not a religion. The others are for all the 3 monotheistic religions. It's also the highest point of the Old City, although the smallest quarter, it's the highest point of the Old City, sits atop Mount Zion. which is biblically also very important, but strategically as well. And it is also adjacent to the old city ramparts that will be built by Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century, early 16th century. So this is just to understand how important, how rich and thorough history there is in Jerusalem of Armenians. And of course, after the genocide, the main pioneers in trade and crafts, the Armenian ceramics, but not only jewelers, watchmakers, tailors, the most known and respected were Armenians. Of course, the political situation, the 1948 Israeli-Arab War and later 67, and also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have taken a huge toll on Armenian demographics. What used to be about 20,000 Armenians post-genocide became today, 2,000 Armenians, which is a 90% drop, which is a huge drop. With about 2,000, 2,500 Armenians today. And of course, that the demographic threat also has other threats that are political and strategic threats today that we face, and other challenges, which I'm sure we will talk about.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Amazing seeing what Armenians' contribution has been in Jerusalem throughout history. I didn't know about the Queens personally, so thank you. And last but not least, let's go on to Syria with Hagop, Yeghia Tashjian again. So a brief history, and then we'll go into some individual questions.
Well, we always say that Syria and Lebanon, like we have somehow the same fate. But of course, when it comes to Syria, the Armenian community in Syria is much older, especially the the Armenians in Aleppo, they were well established. But of course, with the genocide, the influx of the refugees increased in Syria. The Armenians of Damascus and Aleppo were interesting because at the same time, the main middle class of the Armenians in Syria were established there compared to the Armenians of, for example, the northeastern Syria, which is now the Kurdish, let's say, administrated areas. They were agricultural areas. Samely also in the coast of Syria or the southern area of our ancient Syria, like Kesab, and these Armenian communities are much older than the modern history of Syria. However, compared to Lebanon, because I want to always to compare, the Syrian political system differs from Lebanon. Lebanon, at least in theory, is a parliamentary democracy, despite all the setbacks and so forth. But Syria, especially in the starting late 1940s, it was a dictatorship of political parties or military figures who were ruling the country. So the Armenian community had to co-opt or adapt with the reality. There was censorship definitely on the newspapers. Political activism in Lebanon, in Syria, was not the same as that of Lebanon. Although, in theory, again, there are Armenian political parties in Syria. However, there is to some extent censorship when it comes to their activities. The main wave when it comes to, let's say, the political pressure on the Armenians happened in Syria was in the 1950s with the rise of the Arab national movements, the Nasirism from Egypt. Then with late 1960s with the coming of the Ba'athist government. So the Armenians were to some extent adapted to the reality. Why I'm mentioning this? Because to some extent the reality is now the same. We have a government, or let's say an administration in Syria led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Formerly they were Al-Qaeda, but now they are de facto ruling the country. But at the same time, we have a fragmented Syria. That is, the Armenians, for example, now that are living in center Syria and the coast of Syria, they are administered by the ruling government or the administration in Syria, while those Armenians that are living in northeastern Syria, they are administered by the Syrian Democratic Forces led by the Kurds aligned with the Americans. A few months ago, actually, there were as if three Armenian communities. In Damascus and Aleppo and also the coast, they were administered by the previous regime. The most important part is that thanks to the flexibility of the Armenians, they try to cope with the reality. And I think this is something, a uniqueness we have in Lebanon and Syria. well, we can talk about the future, what may happen or the challenges, but what we can say that at least in Aleppo, what I am aware, compared to other areas and to compare to, for example, the Alawites in the coast, there are no attacks against Armenians. Everyone is worshipping at least freely in Aleppo, in Damascus, the churches. There are no provocations against the Armenians. And a few weeks ago, also, we heard that the Turkish Armenian consul, he visited the Armenian consulate in Aleppo. This also shows that the Armenian government in Yerevan is taking certain steps in order to ensure at least the physical continuity of the Armenians, and this also shows that the community in the future should be more flexible, at least to see which direction Syria is going. Because compared to Lebanon, despite the instability, still I can say that Syria's future is uncertain. I mean, maybe if 1 month we're gonna organize another virtual event, there would be a different Syria. So Syria's future is unpredictable. But at least on the ground, what we can say that there are 3 zones of influences: the Turkish zone of influence, which covers northwestern Syria and the center; the Israeli zone of influence, which covers southern Syria; and also the Kurdish American sphere of influence, which covers northeastern Syria. And the Armenians are divided at this geographically between these 3 Syrias, even though in the south we don't have a lot of Armenian presence, but at least we have to be adaptable or flexible to the future of Syria, which is being built in front of us.
Definitely. If I may ask a follow-up question, do you think, considering the 3 Armenian communities you're talking about, do you think that since the recent regime changed, the day-to-day life of Armenians has meaningfully changed, or is it pretty much business as usual? This is to Yeghia, please, about Syria.
The problem is that the topic is very sensitive. So I don't, I mean, maybe Syrian Armenian can explain in detail much better than me. So I'm very I'm self-censoring myself what I will talk, so that if it will be published online or something, people cannot exploit it. Again, so I'm imagining that life in Aleppo. Imagine I'm there in Aleppo, and I know that the militias, or now they are part of the new Syrian army, affiliated or have excellent relations with the Turkey and are trained by the Turkish defense ministry and so forth. They are the ones who are guarding the streets. So I have to adapt to the reality that as if the guards in the streets have close connections with the Turkey. I have to maybe self-censor my events, political events, maybe cultural events. Again, this is my personal opinion. So I have to adapt to the reality, as maybe other communities have adapted to the reality, maybe comparing with Armenians of Istanbul or Armenians of other places in the Middle East. Now, I mean, the main objective is the survival, the political survival of the community, the physical survival of the community. Political affiliations or political analysis comes later.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Turkey, Dr. Papazian, if I may ask about the identities of Armenians in Turkey, do you have any insight, just in a couple minutes, maybe 2-3 minutes, on how Armenians in Turkey navigate their Armenian and Turkish identities in a country where talking about their own genocide is illegal or sensitive? There is the fear of insulting Turkishness. So yeah, can you please talk about that for a bit?
Yes, sure. Very briefly, it's a good question in terms of following also what Yeghia said at the very end. Armenians in Turkey have exactly been doing that after the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, when they found themselves to be citizens of a nation state that they well knew was responsible of massacring and deporting the rest of their people. So they did that. They went into that mode of adaptation and survival, or adaptation for survival. And that was very stably there until the turn of the century. So I did describe the different kinds of pressures, discrimination, and wrongdoings against Armenians throughout the century. And as a result of that, of course, Armenians were became, internalized their Armenian identity, privatized it, and made it conform as much as possible to the Turkish vision of what Armenianness could be, is allowed to be inside its polity, inside its political boundaries. I coined that as the Cemaat boundaries. So what the Turkish regime wanted was turning the Armenians from a people, an ethnic, even with national aspirations, people, to a religious community, to a Cemaat in Turkish, building on Jamia in Arabic, which would be devoid of any national, ethnic, let alone political manifestations or characteristics. So you can be Armenian as much as your Armenianness is limited to the sphere of the church. Speaking of Armenianness and presenting it and even religionizing it as much as possible. And Armenians did follow this approach to a considerable extent, I would say, and then they jumped on the wave because there was no other wave to follow unless they wanted to drown. They would have gotten drowned under the wave of Turkish nationalism until the 1990s, especially the turn of the century in the early 2000s, where we had a general political shift. General shift in the political atmosphere of Turkey with the coming to power of the Islamist regime. That was initially very much welcomed also by the Armenian community, because these guys came forward with an agenda of democratization and Europeanization. So joining the EU, this process of joining the EU was set forth, and things got much better in terms of diversity, the discourse on diversity and democratization. This allowed some more forward-looking or avant-garde, I would say, or daring Armenians in the community, including people like Hrant Dink, and then his followers, the establishment of the newspaper Agos, then the Hrant Dink Foundation after his killing, then figures like Garo Paylan and others. They found this room to speak louder and to step outside the Cemaat boundaries. That is, to speak about history, to politicize Armenianness again, to even ethnicize it again, to take it outside of that very religious, even communitarian religious boundaries and box, and to put it out there. So that slightly changed the approach to Armenian identity, re-ethnicizing it again, if you want, re-politicizing it again. But what we're seeing in the last 10 years, beginning 2015-16, with the increased re-authoritarianization, I would say, of Turkey, of the Republic of Turkey, and the growth of nationalism, of ethno-nationalism, we're seeing again a slow move back to the traditional way of being, and that is again moving back to the inner circle, to the private circle. Though some things have been taken already, the genie has been out of the box, and some taboos have been broken, including what concerns the discourse on the Armenian genocide to a considerable extent.
Thank you very much. Interesting hearing about the religiosity and cultural aspects of being Armenian. Going on to Jerusalem, Setrag and Hagop, can you tell us a little bit about Save the Ark's mission, the historical significance of, we talk about the historical, but more of the present significance of the Armenian quarter, and updating us on the legal battle for ownership, since quite a few of us have been following it in recent months.
So yes, first of all, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. So as Setrag mentioned, being a rich community, but we have a lot of problems, and currently in these days where we are facing legal struggles due to an illegal land deal which was signed by the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which is the governing body of the Armenian Church and community in Jerusalem. The deal was signed back in 2021 by the Patriarch himself, the Grand Sacristan, and the former real estate director, leasing property of 11,500 square meters out of 19,000 square meters of the Armenian Gardens, the historical Armenian Gardens, located on the highest point in the old city of Jerusalem, next to the ramparts of the old city, and also the biggest open space left inside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. The deal was signed between the Patriarchate and the company registered in Israel and in the United Arab Emirates, named Zana Gardens. The purpose of the deal is to build a 7-star hotel on that plot of land. and the deal is for a 98 years long-term lease. The community discovered more details about the deal only in April 2023, when we discovered that not only the parking lot, which was in the past the Cows Garden, but also houses of Armenian families are included in the deal. Parts of the Alex and Mari Seminary School are also included in the deal. The Garden of the Patriarchate, the parking lot of the Patriarchate, and recently we discovered that also there is a chance that parts of the Patriarchate building is also included. So that means the southern part, the western part of the Armenian quarter is threatened due to this illegal land deal. So when we discovered out the some more details about the deal, the community decided to demonstrate and to raise its voices. And it is important to understand that the community in Jerusalem is very dependent because many community members, they live inside the convent or they live inside houses owned by the patriarchate in the quarter, or they work for the patriarchate. So it was very difficult to mobilize the community to demonstrate against this deal. So only by the time discovering more details, we succeeded to convince the community members to join the struggle, because we believe in transparency, and this is what we are doing in the past 2 years. So we established the Save the Ark movement in May 2023, when we started to demonstrate, and we had weekly demonstrations from May 2023 to September 2023. Every Friday, we used to gather in the Metzpag, which is the main courtyard of the St. James Convent, a few meters away of the Cows Garden, and to have weekly demonstrations and to demand first the cancellation, the immediate cancellation of the deal, and to cooperate with the community so we can understand what happened, how this deal was signed, and what are the ways to cancel it. So following months of demonstrations, the Patriarchate decided to send a cancellation letter to the company, but not because of the pressure of the community. The cancellation letter, there were three reasons why the Patriarchate sent the cancellation letter following an investigation by the Patriarchate. So they investigated the history of the company and the investors, and they found out that the investors, both they have a long criminal record and they misrepresented themselves to the Patriarchate. The second thing is bribery and corruption, that the former real estate director, who is known also of Father Baret Yerezian, who was defrocked in April 2020, in May 2023, and is known also Hachig Yerezian. He was bribed by the company to push for the implementation of the contract. And the third argument is that the Patriarchate agreed for 7,500 square meters and not on 11,500 square meters, as it mentions in the contract. But when you read the first page of the contract, it says that clearly it's 11,500 square meters. So the Patriarchate decided to send a cancellation letter without mentioning that they were under pressure or that the community is the reason why they decided to cancel. And they sent the cancellation letter on the 26th of October 2023. And the first day they received the letter, the company, instead of answering legally to the letter sent by the Patriarchate, they decided to send bulldozers. Armed settlers were sent by the company. Different groups in Jerusalem and outside of Jerusalem were hired by the company to come and attack the community and try to take over the land illegally. So we decided from October 2023 that we have to maintain presence on the ground. So it's been more a year and a half that the community members are guarding the area, maintaining presence on the ground in order to make sure that the company is not trying to take any illegal steps and to repossess the property. And why to repossess the property? Because they were already possessing one part of the company, the parking lot. So the entrance and the exit were possessed by them. And then when the attacks started, we decided that we need to advance and take over back the property. So it took us months to take over control, all over the property. So in January 2023, we succeeded to ensure that the entire property is in our hands, and since then we maintain presence in the house garden. But maintaining presence on the ground is not enough to safeguard the Armenian heritage and the integrity of the Armenian culture, but it is also important to take legal actions. So the Patriarchate decided to initiate their own lawsuit, because sending a cancellation letter doesn't mean that the deal is cancelled. You have to start legal proceedings, and the court will rule if the deal is cancelled or not. So the Patriarchate decided to initiate their legal proceedings in December 2023 based on the three arguments they presented in the cancellation letter. And the community, 2 months later, in February 2024, decided to initiate its own lawsuit based on two important legal arguments. Before giving a brief explanation about the legal arguments, we would like to mention that we are supported by two legal teams. One is the local legal team, and the second one is the international legal team, which they work pro bono. The members are Karni Kerkonian, Ani Nazarian, she is also with us in the Zoom. Garo Ghazarian, Arman Tatuyan, Lizel Dajani, Saro Kerkonian, and the local lawyers. They work together to ensure that the rights of the community are protected. So the two arguments we are presenting in our lawsuit are: first is the authority issue, that the patriarch, who is the head of the church, had no authority according to the bylaws of the patriarchate to sign this deal. And why he had no authority to sign this deal? Because according to the constitution, the patriarchate can sign deals only from 1 year to 25 years and from 25 to 49 years. And there are specific individuals within the patriarchate that can sign the deal, these deals. And also, the people who sign it are only religious people. There are no civil people, lay people in the patriarchate. So only religious people take the decisions and sign such deals. So in order to sign a deal of 25 to 49 years, the patriarch, the grand sacristan, the head of the General Assembly, which is, let's say, the Congress, and the Holy Synod, which is the cabinet, they have to sign these deals. But it is but the patriarchate cannot sign deals above 49 years. The patriarchate changed its own bylaws in 2015 from allowing for 99 years deals to be signed to 25 to 49 years. So the patriarch himself, who voted in favor of changing the constitution, violated the constitution by signing this deal for 98 years. And also we support this argument with a letter signed by the majority of the Brotherhood, by 17 priests, demanding from the patriarch to cancel this deal, stating that he violated the constitution based on the different articles. The second argument we are presenting is that in 1574, the patriarch at that time, Patriarch Antonius, who initiated the process to purchase this piece of land, had to register this land as an endowment, as a waqf. Waqf is a word in Arabic that means, the translation is to put a stop. That means properties which their status is a waqf cannot be leased or sold, and they must be trusted to specific group of people or a purpose. So the patriarch at that time, he registered the land in the Islamic Sharia court during the Ottoman time, in the Islamic Sharia court as a waqf for the benefit of his family members. But when no one is left, then the trust is transferred automatically to the Armenian community, to the Armenian Christian community of Jerusalem. That means the patriarchate, or the head of the church, is the custodian, is the trustee who needs to protect the land, and the beneficiary owners are the members of the Armenian community of Jerusalem. So these are our two arguments. We have a court session in September 2025. Meanwhile, we continue to strengthen our lawsuit by collecting evidence and documentation, and we look forward to continue our struggle to preserve and protect the Armenian heritage and presence in Jerusalem through legal means and all kind of ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work. We will be following that case also. If I may ask one last question to the entire panel from my end, we'll keep each answer to 2 minutes since I know we only have a couple minutes left in the whole program. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Armenian diaspora, especially in the US, since that's where many of our ASA chapters are based, how we can support those in your region? Is there any tangible way we can contribute to the strengthening of your community, or are charity and humanitarian aid the only avenues of assistance?
Shall we? Yeah.
If
Okay,
you could
we'll
answer that,
take
yeah,
it,
and then we'll
and
go
then
to the other
yeah.
panelists.
We can add 2 points here.
Yeah, so obviously for us, the most important is, as Hagop mentioned, their pro bono international team, but we have local lawyer team, 2 lawyers that we have to pay. One is Israeli Jewish, one is Arab Palestinian Israeli, and so financial support, obviously, but we don't like to limit it to that. Of course, you know, in the 1920s, we used to have 10,000 Armenian pilgrims visit Jerusalem yearly. And they would actually put up their tents and caravans on the Cow's Garden. So another thing they can do is to come visit, to come see with their own eyes the wealth that the Armenians have, the power that the Armenians have, the luck. We're very fortunate in Jerusalem, the privileges we have. This is something they should come, and also to see the challenges with their own eyes. And of course, for the US, it's always the same, you know, it's one of the biggest democracies. We'll see what happens after, but for now. And I mean, when we went to the US, we went to the Congress and senators' offices. You know, you just knock on the door and go in, which is very surprising for us, especially Armenians of Jerusalem who don't vote in Israeli elections, don't vote in Palestinian elections, don't vote in municipal elections, and we don't even vote for our own patriarch and our own representatives. So this is something that should be done. Always write letters to your senators, to your congressmen. Show that the Armenian issue of Jerusalem is something that is high up on the agenda, especially with the huge electorate we have in the US. This is something that helps a lot, just to mobilize all your politicians, to tell them that you're worried about this case and that you're following this case and that this is a very important case for you.
I think Setrag said all the important points.
Amazing, thank you. We can move on to Dr. Papazian. Just 2 minutes.
I'll
Yeah.
be very brief, also because I'm not from the community myself. My research is on Armenians of Istanbul and of Turkey more generally. I'll just, building on my research and my understanding, I'll say I think what's most important from my perspective is perhaps not as tangible and as practical things as in other cases, but perhaps we should start generally the Armenian global community should perhaps start understanding or perhaps paying more attention to understanding the precarious situation in which Istanbul Armenians, Turkish Armenians have been in post-genocide times, and trying to hold back before judging, but also before perhaps thinking, before perhaps thinking that this is the way to help them by putting immense pressure on the Turkish state, say in lobbying here and there, because that sometimes that can backfire. Again, because of the very precarious conditions in which the Armenians of Turkey have been. So it's different. It's very different than in other cases, especially when it comes to their relationship with the Turkish state that we see also in other contexts, including in Syria, for instance. Now.
Very valid, thank you. And last but not least, on the topic of both Syria and Lebanon, can we hear about how the diaspora can perhaps be of support?
Yes, on 2 levels. On individual levels, I mean, as Hrag has done researching about the Armenian community. Because the more you research, the more you find more information, and also it's a bridge. I mean, for me, like for living in Lebanon, I have learned new things. I mean, Setrag was saying, for example, that the Armenians don't vote in neither the Israeli or the Palestinian elections, which was something new for me. So maybe now the first thing I will Google it, why? So I think researching about Armenian communities is important, and of course on community level, humanitarian aid, education exchange program is very important. I always, for example, try to push the exchange program between the Lebanese universities and also universities in Armenia. And also in the future, maybe Armenian programs in universities in US and Lebanon. We have to do that because it's not just about cultural interaction, but also building bridges and networks. So we have to push on both levels.
Certainly, if I can ever be of assistance, please let me know with that. I guess we can wrap up the panel here. I want to thank everyone once more for joining, for being participants and listening, but especially to our speakers who have been joining. So 11:30, where a couple of you are based. So thank you once again, and let me know if I can ever answer any additional questions.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you
So
very
no,
much.
no questions, right? No.
Perfect. I think we're all good. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you very
night, and
much.
good luck on your exams.
Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.